Are you looking into pulling for Shinobu, wondering if her boss is actually worth it? Or are you someone wondering if they should just actually get a new leader? Well, if you're either or none of these, you are all welcome here as I talk about the he might lose but he will never admit the Itto boss of the Arataki gang, the one and only Arataki Itto, whose banner is coming in the next patch. It is something that we, especially the free-to-play player, always have to consider whenever a new patch comes to see whether if a character is really worth the pull, because we're basically making sacrifices of not getting the other character in the same patch unless you're pretty lucky, and I also wish all of you luck on getting that. But today we're going to be focusing on fully Itto to see if he's really worth it for you to go for in this patch, diving in depth into his gameplay and the current meta situation, as well as giving you my personal advice on whether you should go for him or not. Now, if you're new to the channel guys, I usually make guides video especially for free-to-play player, helping you make the best decision when playing Genshin Impact, so be sure to subscribe to not miss out. And also it is a free way of supporting me to get to my 20,000 subscriber faster. Either way, I really appreciate every one of you. Let's just jump into the video. So what do we know about Itto? He is a hyper carry Geo Claymore user, known for his speedy and forceful attack. Now when we say hyper carry, it means that he doesn't usually have support capability most of the time, and his damage output requires him to have field time just like Eula, Xiao, and some other hyper carries. Itto for a hyper carry also have some interesting mechanics and is mostly focuses on his normal and charge attack gameplay, which is whenever you use his normal attack he gets what's called a superlative stack. These stacks are really important for Itto to dish out an insane number of damage, because whenever you have these stacks, his charge attack will change from a boring looking spinning top that takes a million years to recover to this awesome looking change of charge attack output. You can have a maximum of 5 stack, which directly results in how many superlative charge attack you can do. There are various ways for you to get these stacks. During his normal attack sequence, which is between the 2nd and 4th string of attack, he will get 1 stack each. Then once he goes into his burst mode, he will also get stacks on the 1st and 3rd string. And then his E skill, where he sends out his lovely friendly bull Ushi, will also give him stacks whenever it is hit. Now talking about his E skill, he also does very decent damage with his skill, also having very low cooldown of 6 seconds. His Ushi will be the taunter on the field for his enemies, taking damage for Itto's and gives him superlative stacks whenever it is hit. His burst turns all of his damage into Geo while also boosting Itto damage based on his defense. So when playing Itto, the main thing you will have to keep in mind is to try having his burst up most constantly. You will then use his normal attack to gain superlative stacks and hold his charge attack for insane damage output, because both of his passive talent actually provides even more power for his superlative charge attack of providing both attack speed and 35% damage increase based on his defense. He is one of the few hyper carries in the game where you want to equally use your normal attack together with your charge attack, which will take a bit of time to get used to. For Itto, he is also one of the most free-to-play friendly character in the game when it comes to build, mainly because most of your worst artifacts that you have can be used by Itto. And what are your worst artifacts? They all have defense stats, right? So Itto, who scales with defense, really is one of the few characters in the game that can make good use out of defense scaling artifact. And yes, he has his own artifact sets, which is recommended. However, if you happen to have any of the off-piece that have high defense substats, he can use that. His weapon for free-to-play option is also pretty good. The White Blind basically is the best free-to-play option for him, one of the only claymore that gives pretty good defense stats. Also, even though Itto do scales with defense, that doesn't always mean that you have to go for defensive weapon, but weapon with scalings like attack is also usable on him. So if you happen to have some option that is better than the White Blind, like the Serpent Spine from the Battle Pass, it will be a better option for Itto. Now whenever we look into whether to pull for a character, usually we also think about how good they will be in the current meta, which is the same for Itto. How good is he in the current meta, or more specifically the Abyss? Now it's safe to say that we already know how insane of a hyper carry he can be. Itto would dish out a huge amount of damage as well as having access to good AoE, especially during his superlative charge attack. Therefore, taking on a group of of enemy is very favorable for him. However, being a Geo character really has its downside, and the most important reason being that Geo is one of the hardest elements to break enemies' shield. If Itto is up against enemy that requires a lot of shield breaking, he will generally take longer than the other elements, or would rather rely entirely on his supporting teammate that has the correct shield breaking element, costing you quite a lot of DPS numbers without having him on the field. Other than that, his team comps are rather limited at this point. In that since he is a Geo character that scales with defense, he usually would want to stick with our niche defensive support Geo to be on the team. That leaves only 2 spots left, which is okay. However, generally Itto would do best in mono Geo team to get the most out of Goro's buff and elemental particle support. But those are quite hard for some of these passive bits where we're focusing on breaking shield at this point, making Geo hyper carries like Itto not very favorable. Therefore, his usage in the Abyss has dropped quite a bit and comes down to player preferences. However, since his banner is coming, the Abyss during his patch banner will be good for Itto for sure. As for how it will be good for him in the later patches, as long as we don't always require to break shield, he will most likely do well. Now, since we are already on his rerun, some of you Itto lovers out there would actually consider pulling for his Constellation, which is totally fine if you really like the character because his Constellation is pretty good for his DPS output. However, most of the time I don't always recommend going for Constellation because pulling for a totally new 5-star character is always better than investing into Constellations. So for Itto C1, it gives him 5 more superlative stacks after using his burst, 2 of the stacks right after his burst, and then 1 each for every 0.5 second for 1.5 second after. Now this doesn't sound like too much, and I would say that it's an okay Constellation where you get to dish out more of his charge attack for more DPS output. Now in terms of how much money you may potentially have to use to get his C1, I wouldn't say it's too much of it worth it. However, if you're looking at his C2, which for every Geo character Itto has in the team, he gets a bit of burst skill cooldown reduction, but what's best is that he gets up to 18 energy restoration for his burst, making his burst requirement only cost 52 energy, which is really good, especially when Itto wants to be in his burst most of the time. Therefore, having up to C2 is actually better if you want to invest into Constellation. As usual, C3 and C5 would only give you 3 more talent level. C4, everyone gains a 20% attack and defense after his burst ends, which gives Itto a little bit of support quality of life to his team, which is a pretty decent cons. And his C6 practically is insane, giving his charge attack a 70% crit damage bonus, plus having more chance of not consuming superlative stacks, meaning if you're lucky, who knows if you're able to use his charge attack until your stamina runs out. So overall, his Constellation is pretty good. However, for best of your investment, you should only either invest into C2 or all the way up to C6. Okay, now that we've basically known about Itto playstyle and the current meta situation, let's look more into his pros and cons. First is his pros is that Itto don't usually have trouble with energy issue because most of the time he will get at least 1 Geo character on the same team. You will probably never run Itto alone without a Geo support, but he will more likely going to be in a mono Geo comp where he will never experience energy issues. He has access to very good DPS damage, especially his superlative charge attack has very good AoE dealing with good group enemy situation. He can also easily hit within Venti's burst and against Spectre because his charge attack has rather long reach, and also he's very free-to-play friendly, having access to good free-to-play options and defensive artifacts build. As for his cons, in order to use Itto to his fullest potential, you will need to know how to manage his burst uptime and his superlative super strength stacks for the most DPS output. Usually this is added through the use of support character like Raiden Shogun or secondary Geo character like Albedo or Goro, which makes his team building a bit more costly than preferred and also limited team comp at times. Also, the Geo elements is generally pretty hard to break shield, so once again you will need to consider your team build when using Itto going up with enemies that require shield breaking. His playstyle consists of skillfully interweaving of his normal attack with his charge attack as well as his use of Ushi, so his gameplay mechanic when you're first using him will get a bit tough to get used to, so therefore it takes time for you to master playing Itto. And finally, Geo Element doesn't have any elemental reaction apart from Crystallize, which only gives you shielding. And so now that we've gone through basically everything on Itto, I'll be giving my own opinion on whether you should go for Itto or not. Again, this is purely my advice, so you can choose to follow or not, it is up to you. Itto is a very good hyper carry, however quite unique in terms of his playstyle, so if you're lacking a hyper carry and feels how he play quite enjoyable, then he's definitely for you. However, personally I don't always go for Yu hyper carries, or especially Itto, because his team comps are generally quite hard form around, especially when he sticks with Goro most of the time for his support. And since we're up against many shield breaking enemies recently, Itto finds a harder time being on the team. So once again, unless you really love Itto, then you would already have considered going for him, but if you're still on the fence, you should test him out a little bit more and consider if your own account has enough decent support to form a team around Itto. We also have Kuki Shinobu on his banner, so that's a consideration too. If you don't want Itto, then consider your pity before trying to go for Shinobu. However, if you don't mind, then it's a pretty good banner to go for, since you might get both Itto and Kuki as a new character in one go. In the end, this is all up to you and your preferences, though I hope that this video gave you some insight to help you make your decision in terms of pulling for Itto or not. Now I know that there are other characters who are still coming, such as Xiao and Yilan, who are dropping in 2.7, or even Kazuha is going to be coming back pretty soon. If you're still pondering on which character to pull, then within some of my next video I will be sharing more in depth into which character is best for you to go for on your account. So if you're interested, once again be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell notification to not miss out any of these videos once it comes out. In the meantime, be sure to check out some of the top teams for Ittos to see if your account have these characters and form the best team around Itto. It would also help you decide to whether you have good support for Itto if you're planning to get him. Once again, I hope that the video have been helpful to you, and I wish you a super day, and I will catch you on the next video.